All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is time today to talk a little bit something controversial. And today, what I wanted to go over was one of the biggest mistakes that Kuro Games has made when it's come to their character design. And there's a reason why, ladies and gentlemen, I've got Changli up here. I'm not talking about her visual aesthetic, not talking about where her Tassin mark is placed, not talking about anything when it actually comes to how the character looks at all, but more so the problems with the character's attribute, fusion over here, and, well, let's be honest here, the design of her kit. My firm belief, especially after looking at the state of many people's accounts, especially looking at the active state of the roster and what other fusion characters are able to provide, I do believe that Changli had her kit slightly mismanaged, or in a lot of ways released too early. It's safe to say that Changli was one of the very first limited characters in the game, right? We just take a look over here. What we can see is that Changli was released in version 1.1, and she was released on July 22nd, basically 6 months ago. And so with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, it is fair to say, when we look at the roster as a whole, she doesn't really have a best in slot partner. She doesn't really have somebody that she meshes super well with. She doesn't have somebody that fully leverages this outro skill buff and works well with her in a dual DPS team. And it's fair to say that she does have some great partners. She has somebody like Zhang Liao that gets the job done in dual DPS, but Zhang Liao's Electro. He doesn't gain the full benefit from her outro buff. You have a character like Encore.
Time for another adventure?
That doesn't even use half of her outro buff, because that buff to liberation that Changli provides, it only works on Encore's Forte circuit. And ladies and gentlemen, you swap off field with this character and lose Changli's outro buff when you actually ever activate this in a normal rotation. And so Encore is really only getting her 20% fusion damage buff. Sanhua's a better buffer for her. You could say that Qixia is somebody, right, that benefits from Changli and that can use a lot of the buffs that she provides. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? This playstyle doesn't really work that well in dual DPS. Qixia is somebody that dedicates a lot of field time to getting good results. She needs something where she builds up attack up to 30 times from all the different bullets that she's hitting, and she hogs a lot of field time to actually get her full damage potential out. And that means that, well, Changli, a person that wants those swap windows, that wants something that's cancelable, doesn't really work that well with her. And even though she does have a liberation that she can use, and that does deal a good bit of damage, well, the playstyles in the character kits just doesn't really synergize between the two. And so with that, Changli, ladies and gentlemen, she's had a bit of struggle finding a place on the roster where she can fully leverage all of her strengths. And today I wanted to break down how Kuro honestly could have just done it better. And I understand there's currently a lot of speculation about what Brant is going to do, the fact that he's fusion, the fact that he's a sword. People are thinking that he's gonna have some synergy with Changli, and you could only hope that there's gonna be some synergy with Changli, because Brant's releasing in, let's be honest guys, like a month from now. And keeping in mind how long Changli's been in the game, thinking that Brant's going to be one of her ideal partners, that means that it will have been literally 7 months since this character's release that they're finally getting somebody that they work with on the roster. 7 whole months, over half of a year since her release, that she's actually getting somebody that she can work with. There's a reason, ladies and gentlemen, that Changli has not gotten a rerun yet. There's a reason why across version 1.0 to 1.2, the 1.2 characters have already reran before she's had a rerun yet. And that's because, in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, she was released far too early. So with that, let me go into what I think would have been a better way to manage this character. My honest opinion is that this kit, its complexity, was a little bit too early for the release of the game. And I think what Kuro should have done is actually just change the role of these two characters.
Would you like
It is my honest opinion that Camelia's kit,
Would you like a fun game?
being basic
between
attack
the
focused,
two of us?
should honestly have just been given to
Plan
Changli.
with convention.
Imagine, ladies and
Then
gentlemen,
conquer
if Changli
by
was a
ingenuity.
basic attack-focused fusion main DPS that worked with a character like Sanhua. She would have immediately had an amazing partner right off the rip that she could have worked with. And players would have been able to get full value out of Changli, out of her signature, and they could have hit the ground running in version 1.1 and had a very strong endgame team. She would have had things like the whole budding state, the ephemeral, all of these different mechanics that Camellia has. And just imagine if Camellia was released but just in a fusion version called Changli. Similarly, right? We could have also seen Rosia maybe as like that fusion sort of buffer, that fusion sort of character. And then she could have buffed Encore as well, giving players a free-to-play option from that point of view in the whole hyper carry setup. Because currently right now, Rosia is a little bit restricted in a sense. And if Changli had been that fusion basic attack focus limited 5-star, my oh my, we would have had even more synergies down the road if Rosia had been just a fusion version of her buffing, considering what she's able to provide to a character like Camellia. And so you might be thinking now, well, Saint, what would Camellia do then if her kit would have just been Changli's? Or if Changli would have just had her kit? And I kind of already spoiled it. I think that Camellia, as a Havoc character, should have just gotten Changli's kit. Imagine, right? If Changli's outro skill instead read fusion damage amplified by 20% and resonance liberation damage amplified by 25%, or until the resonator switched out for 10 seconds. Imagine if this had been the case for Camellia, and she just has the rest of Changli's abilities, the quick swap playstyle. Now, ladies and gentlemen, think about it this way. Camellia on release in version 1.4 would have had two amazing partners. They would have had Havoc Rover as a partner, a character that deals a sizable amount of resonance liberation damage, right? Look at this insane multiplier of over 1,300, this huge nuke that they have in their kit. Camellia would now be a dual DPS partner for Havoc Rover, and obviously they've got that relationship in the lore, very, very deep connection, and there would be an incentive now to use these two characters on basically any situation where you would need Havoc damage, and that could have been amazing. That could have been a good little like lore thing, and I think a lot of players would have enjoyed playing their Rover and Camellia side by side. So that's a bit of a loss there in my opinion. You would have had this built-in synergy between the two characters, and guess what? There would have been another one as well. You would have been able to pair a dual DPS Camellia who has Changli's kit but is still Havoc with Danjin too. And with Danjin's outro skill buff, right? The one that buffs Havoc damage by 23%, you could have played a dual DPS team with Camellia in her Changli version and Danjin where they simply buff each other, because Danjin's Resonance Liberation also does a pretty decent chunk of damage as well. And then this general Havoc buff would have worked for all of Camellia's, the Changli version of Camellia. It would have worked for all of her damage too. They would have buffed each other, and it would have been an amazing dual DPS lineup as well if you wanted to make that Changli version of Camellia do more damage. And so when we think about it this way, ladies and gentlemen, I do believe that there was a lost amount of potential here. A really big miss on the devs' end, where having these two characters' kits basically switched completely while keeping their attributes the same would have been better for the early game experience for a lot of different players, would have given deeper lore connection and team play for Camellia. And I do think in general, it wouldn't have been a very big loss at all. The only loss you could say is that Encore would have been quote-unquote power crept by Changli being basic attack focused or having Camellia's kit. But let's be honest here, ladies and gentlemen, Encore has kind of already been power crept by Camellia because they both deal basic attack damage. If you don't have Rosia, you're pairing Sanhua with Camellia every single time. Encore, in most situations, actually doesn't really have a team anymore unless you pulled Rosia. And in that situation, like I mentioned before, if Rosia had simply been a fusion basic attack buffer in that hypothetical situation I was talking about, then Encore already has a partner, and then Sanhua's free as well to do whatever she wants. And so in terms of like the overall life cycle of the game, I think that this is what I would have done differently if I was the Kuro devs. And it would have made Changli into a hyper carry, which is a much better character to release in 1.1 of the game, instead of like the dual DPS reliant teammate that she currently is right now, when the game just simply didn't, and honestly currently doesn't have the roster to support her. While if Camellia had just had Changli's kit but stayed Havoc, she would have already had two amazing partners right off the rip that she could have worked with Danjin and Havoc Rover. And I think it would have put the characters in, I'm gonna be honest, better meta positions overall, and it would have given a lot more potential to this character a lot earlier on in her life cycle. And let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, there are a lot of people, a lot of individuals that pulled Changli thinking she was going to be a main DPS, that pulled her weapon, and then they tried playing her as a main DPS, they tried playing her in hyper carry, and they were very, very disappointed by the results, especially compared to prior releases like Encore, like Jian, like Jinsei. And to me, when that sort of differing of expectations, right, the unintended results were coming out, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people might have put down the game because of that differing level of performance. So do keep in mind, right, this sort of 2020 look back. This would have kept the kits in the game. This would have basically just turned Camellia into Havoc Changli and Changli into Fusion Camellia. And so all of the playstyles would have still been in there, all the visual designs. Obviously, there would have been different work done by the devs to develop it in this way. But in my opinion, this would have been the best way to go to both retain players and just have more synergy built into the roster. And it would have put both characters in, I think, a better position overall. So let me know what you think about this sort of hypothetical situation. Was Changli and her design honestly a mistake? And whether or not you think that this sort of framing instead would have been better for the game's health overall. Let me know what you all think. Peace out.